Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. Welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I am Jillian, your host, and I am back again with the lovely Clare Kane. How are you, Clare?
Jillian, I'm well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me back.
Yes, it is such a joy to have you. And as always, whenever we're chatting, we have more questions than we can possibly talk about in one podcast. And so we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the topic of boundaries. So we'll make sure to link the show notes, the podcast from last week. So listeners, if you haven't listened to that, I would really encourage you to pause this episode and go back to that one, because Clare really sets the foundation, answers some really good questions about what are boundaries, how can we set them, what does that look like, how do we include our spouse in that? It's a really lovely episode, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into this episode. So go ahead and listen to that if you haven't. But I think to recap a little bit, Clare, could you just give again your definition of boundaries and talk a little bit about who we set those with?
Sure. So boundaries are basically the standards of behavior, the rules or limits of acceptable behavior that we have for our interactions with other people. What do we find acceptable when people interact with us, and what do we not find acceptable? We set them with everyone, either consciously or unconsciously, with every person with whom we interact. And they're going to be different for different people. And that is perfectly reasonable. We have different levels of intimacy with our immediate family than we have with strangers in the supermarket, than we have with people in the church community, right? There's all these varying levels of intimacy. And boundaries are really the foundation for relationship, because they create the space in which we operate our freedom, how far it extends around us, and it allows us to build relationships of trust and safety with others.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. And before we started the show, listeners, Clare and I were just talking about what else are some of the possible questions, the things that are really important to talk about. And this episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about what do we do when others don't respect the boundaries that we set. But we realize that before we can even talk about that, we need to talk about our internal boundaries and recognizing what it is that we need. So Clare, would you talk about that? How can someone go about realizing those boundaries, setting time for those? What might that look like for someone?
That's a great question. So it's really about noticing and reflecting. So self-reflection is really important. Like, how am I doing? How am I feeling about my relationship with this person? How am I feeling at the prospect of interacting with them? As we said in the last episode, we wanted to put this particular topic forward as the holidays are coming, because we're going to be interacting with a lot of families, sometimes often wonderful people, sometimes wonderful and challenging at the same time, right? For a number of reasons. And so as you listeners, as you're reflecting, as I'm reflecting on who I'm going to be encountering this holiday season, perhaps there's one or two people where you're recognizing maybe there's a little bit of hesitation, maybe there's a little bit of dread, maybe there's a little bit of, I don't know if I have enough in me to interact with this person on the regular, right? That is really important, because often it's your heart kind of intuiting. It's giving you that emotion rising is a piece of information. It's not good. It's not bad. Doesn't mean you're charitable, uncharitable. It's just a feeling. It doesn't have a will, so it can't be good or bad. But it's an important piece of information, because often what it's telling you is that perhaps you have extended yourself too far. You have extended more of your emotional energy dealing with this person, maybe fending off intrusive questioning, fending off intrusive suggestions related to something in your life, perhaps infertility and or pregnancy loss, meaning suggestions, but fending them off or not allowing them to sink in your heart is really tough, and it takes a lot out of you. And so the internal boundary is literally determining, and this may be literally the night before a holiday party, or literally the night before a baby shower that you have to go to. Do I have enough in the tank right now? Do I have enough in the tank? And if I don't, that's okay. And that's not a failing. So if I don't, but for good reasons of my own, I've decided I want to go, what are the boundaries I'm going to set for myself? There have been seasons in my life where I have literally known I was going to be in a situation with very challenging people, and knew that there were good reasons for me to be there, reasons I decided were very good. I needed to be there for maybe other people there. And I literally set a timer on my phone. 20 minutes. I'm going to be there for 20 minutes. If I encounter someone enormously challenging, I am going to keep the conversation brief. I am not going to engage. And I am going to excuse myself the second I can. And if I can't excuse myself, because sometimes people are steamrollers, they won't let you out of conversation, I will say, I really need to go now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, it's basically taking your own internal temperature. How much do I have? How much emotional energy do I have left to deal with this? Because there are going to be seasons in your life when you're grieving something. And for a lot of people, the holiday season is not a happy season. It's a season of grief. It's a season of loss for a number of reasons. It can be, another holiday season when you don't have the thing you're longing for from the Lord. And so if you don't have a lot in your tank right now, that is 100% okay. And it's 100% okay for you to very carefully calibrate the interactions you have and to set the boundaries you need to be able to get through it healthily for yourself.
Claire, I really appreciate the timer. I heard it somewhere. Someone didn't directly suggest it to me, but I think I maybe read it on a blog that someone had started setting a timer, and that was their, especially when they knew they were going to be in a situation with someone that it would be difficult to excuse themselves from.
Yep.
And I have found that to be really helpful, to be able to set the alarm with a ringtone that sounds like someone is calling. It's very easy to say, I have to get somewhere. I need to excuse myself, whatever it is that your script is, which we talk more about in the episode from last week about scripts. But I think that's really helpful. And I also just want to say that our podcast, especially the podcasts with Claire or any other mental health professionals, this isn't therapy. This isn't advice personally. And so if you're really struggling with this, we recommend that you reach out to someone locally. You reach out to Springs in the Desert. We can help you connect to someone locally who can help you do the work of finding what those internal boundaries are and then being able to communicate them. Because as Claire has said in the previous episode and other episodes, and as we all know, we're not always great at being able to figure out what those things are. And it's totally okay to talk that through with someone and to get some help in formulating those words and figuring out what is it that would help me? What is it that would allow me, what these boundaries to be more free to live within my agency, as Claire was talking about. So I really appreciate starting with that, because if we don't know what our boundaries are, we can't really communicate them to people. We can't share them and set boundaries that will actually be helpful to us. We might be swimming to figure out what those boundaries should be. So I think to dive a little bit deeper now, Claire, we've set the boundaries. So now we've talked about what they are. We've done the work, this internal work to figure out what they are, and we've communicated it to those people who need to know them. What do we do, especially right in a season of infertility, when we are likely already struggling for community? We're already struggling to feel like we have people in our corner, that we have friends and a group around us, but there's someone in our community that isn't respecting our boundaries. What do we do when that happens?
I think first acknowledge that it's really tough, right? It's really challenging when you have someone who makes a hard season harder, right? Okay. And I think that's the first thing, is to recognize that's a difficult and uncomfortable emotion. And it's okay to feel upset and angry about that, right? And resentful about that. That's okay to feel those feelings. I think it's also really important to remember what we talked about in the last podcast. We just made a statement of it. You are not responsible for somebody else's emotional responses to the boundaries you set. And so if you have set a harder boundary with someone in your community because they don't have great respect for the boundaries you set before, and so they want to keep maybe moving closer, but you're like, no, that's not what I need or want right now, but they keep pushing and are maybe hurt by the boundary you're setting, or upset, angry, that is theirs to deal with. They may attempt to make that your responsibility. They may guilt trip you. There's lots of ways in which people can attempt to make their feelings your business. And I sometimes encourage clients to literally use the phrase, not my monkeys, not my circus, right? Like literally, as you're seeing someone with that maybe challenge, and again, I love a good one-liner script just to have inside your head and or communicate. So instead of I'm sorry, you're feeling that way, I'm sad, or I hear you. And it's really important that blank, right? I also really like when statements. So the when, the W is when you blank. The I is I feel blank. And the N is I need you to blank. So when you keep making suggestions about novenas, I feel judged in my devotion, that somehow my devotion is lacking. I need you to stop making that suggestion. I appreciate the sentiment, but I need you to stop making that suggestion. That's a boundary. I need you to stop.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Oh, but I blah, 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 blah. No. So when statements, when you, and fact, I feel fact, I need you to action. Very
Wow.
simple
That's so
action.
helpful. That's so helpful.
I feel blank. I need you to blank. Yes, it is literally, it's one of the foundational little core exercises for a lot of marriage and family counseling because, and it's very helpful because it's breaking things down into literally a factual moment. When you do this, I feel this. And it's very hard for people to argue, you shouldn't feel.
Yep.
Again, okay, you just reached inside my agency and tried to police my feeling. That is very common. I just want to, the attempt, especially in close family members, to police each other's feelings is very real and it can feel extremely intrusive. And so I really want to, if you feel like that is if you recognize that's something that's happening, it's okay to say that. To say, my feelings are mine. I'm going to feel them the way I feel them. You may believe I should feel something different. That's your belief. This is what I'm feeling right now. I need you to blank. And I think the corollary to the win statement, if it's someone who has a pattern, everybody has a bad day, right? And tries to push because they're worried or concerned. And I really want to be clear. You got to be careful about judging someone's motivation for these things. Because I think sometimes when you're in a season of grief and hurt and there's a lot of emotion roiling, we can start to suppose bad will on people's part, like they're malicious, right? Are there occasionally people who derive pleasure from other people's pain? Yes, those people exist and they have a particular kind of pathology. But most of the time, it's usually, especially people close to us, it's usually coming from a place of like worry, love, kind of love coming out the wrong avenue, right? As pushiness as opposed to an offer of help, right? Love, worry, fear, all those kind of things. So it's really okay to just notice the first one or two times. If it becomes a third time, then you're like, okay, this is a clear pattern. It's unlikely this person is going to stop because I've communicated my boundary, maybe more than once. And then to the win statement, you add the corollary. If you continue, this is the consequence you're choosing. You're choosing that we won't be able to spend time together anymore.
Wow, that's really so helpful.
Yeah, or I'm going to have to step back from this ministry or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like this is the consequence you're choosing. If you can't respect that boundary, okay, but this is the consequence you're choosing.
Well, that's helpful. So I think my question then, Claire, is how does our response or our sort of plan of action differ from those who are in our peripheries than those who are close to us? Maybe a sibling, a parent, in-law, spouse, maybe a really close friend. Is there a difference in how we a plan of action in setting the boundary and following through with that?
Yes, for sure. So if it's maybe someone that you only encounter infrequently, or maybe you encounter them frequently, but they are just an acquaintance, someone you encounter, you may actually have a little more room for their intrusiveness. Does that make sense? A little more bandwidth. We call it like a window of tolerance. If you think about literally a window, you open it. So for someone that you only have to encounter for 10 seconds after Mass, you may actually have more to be like, oh, thank you, Mrs. Jones. That's very sweet. We appreciate your prayers, and literally have a script for that. So appreciate that. Just keep praying. Okay. Nope. I so appreciate. Got all the novenas I need. Thank you so much. And you literally move on. When it's someone you're really close to and you regularly spend time with, have a lot of emotional intimacy with, maybe it is your spouse, maybe it is your mom or your mother-in-law, sister, whatever. It's really difficult, but it's even in a sense even more necessary, because if you want to preserve those relationships, it's almost like you have to try to think. I think a good analogy might be like trying to move an enormous bookcase. You have to rock it into the proper position So like each boundary you're setting is like a nudge in terms of healthiness. Like it's going to feel weird. This is totally off kilter for a little bit till we get it in the right position. Each of those boundaries you're setting is a movement towards, no, you can't. This far and no farther. Because I love you and I want to be able to share with you. But when you hammer at me with this, or when you make these kind of comments that undermine, it really hurts me. I'm asking you to stop. Asking you to stop. That's all I'm asking, is to stop. But take a breath. Really, seriously, take a breath. I hear that you don't want me to set this boundary, but I'm setting it. I'm going to go now. Maybe we can talk in a little while. Literally, I have clients, we script and we rehearse. We talked about this before, that rehearsal is really important. You can literally rehearse it. If it's someone in your family, you and your spouse can have a little dress rehearsal. Have your spouse play the other person, right? And if they know them well, act as if you presume they're going to act, so that you can have a little bit of interplay, because there are some people with very strong personalities who do not react well to sudden changes in long set boundary distances, right? You got to move it out 10 feet and they're used to being like, ooh, right up face to face.
Yeah, I love that idea. I love the idea of rehearsing and being able to have a script, to write it down, to memorize it, because I think when you have set this internal boundary and now you've scripted it and it feels more like yours, it is yours when you've memorized it. I remember talking about acting. When you're memorizing a script, when you're first memorizing it, it's just like these other words that are on this page and you're just trying to like get it into your mind and trying to remember all of it. But there's a certain point in your memorization that the words become yours and you get to add tone and inflection and you get to direct them a certain way and to be able to create this character, right? And I think the same thing could happen with your own script, that it really becomes yours and you can have that confidence to be able to say it as you mean it and as you need it. And might still feel uncomfortable, but you might have a little bit more confidence if with the script. And so I really like that. Claire, I'm wondering though, let's say, I think I can probably fall into this at least in different seasons of my life. If we're trying to set these boundaries, but we realize that we are struggling to set them or to keep them. We've set a boundary, but maybe there were situations that were difficult for us to hold that boundary. And now that person who's maybe used to steamrolling has done that again. And I'm struggling with being the one to set and keep. What sort of a plan forward for the person who's struggling with that?
I think it's really important to remember that boundary setting is not a one and done. It's a work in progress, right? And sometimes you have to inch that boundary out through practice and repetition, right? There's a reason why when we're learning to read, we have to repeat things over and over. There's a reason why they make you like literally memorize the times table. We didn't know it right off. Repetition drills something into our brain. And so it's really important to give yourself grace here, because if you did not have the experience of learning how to set healthy boundaries in your family, if your family wasn't particularly good at it, or it just wasn't part of their curriculum, like how to set boundaries in relationships, right? That it's really important you just be gentle with yourself. You're not going to do it perfectly the first time. You may set a boundary like 20 feet out when you only aim for 10, right? And I will say this, it is a heck of a lot easier to walk a boundary closer, like to allow someone more intimacy, than to say, I'm sorry, but I have to allow you less intimacy. I think one piece of this too is, I think there can be this sort of misconception. We add a level of rigor to the love one another directive, because we say, we add this like level of rigor that was never intended, which is we have to like everyone. Everyone has to be our friend. That is 100% not true. 100% not true, right? Preference is real. We prefer to spend time with certain people, and that is a good and a beautiful thing. Loving one another means when in front of another human being, we offer them kindness, we respect their dignity. It does not mean we have to be best friends with them, even if they want to be best friends with us, which is a lovely and a beautiful gift. We have to treat them kindly, but it does not mean that therefore we allow them all the emotional intimacy they could ever desire with us. If that is not our preference, no, absolutely not. That was never the rule, right? That was never the directive from the Lord. Love people. You don't have to like everyone. You aren't going to. That's impossible. And it is a recipe for disaster when it comes to setting healthy boundaries and building legitimate, true, authentic community.
I think that's another great sort of extension of the question, like, how can Christians set a boundary? Because I think that there are these, like you said, additional rules or additional like extensions that we've added to practices and to guidelines and to directives that we live by. And it's important to question those and to go back and say, wait, what does it really mean? What does it really say? Did Jesus say that? Did he say I have to like everyone I meet? No, he didn't say that. And I think too, I just always take so much comfort that Jesus felt all these emotions. He wept, he was hungry, he was tired, he flipped tables. Like he's not unfamiliar with the emotions that we are feeling, but right, we can go to him, and we can take those and go to him to help us with that. And I think it's important as Christians reevaluate like what, yes. and two, because we all grew up in these families who set boundaries differently and practice these things differently. And sometimes those scripts that we were given aren't necessarily the most helpful scripts, the most helpful ways to practice those guidelines. And I think to end cap this conversation, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the episode, and I think a little bit at the beginning. And I think the fear is that if we set these boundaries, we're going to lose people when we're already feeling like we don't have very many people in our lives, or we don't have a lot of people who understand us in our lives. And I'm remembering this study that I read about, that they did this experiment at an elementary school somewhere, I think on the East Coast, a long time ago, but they were studying how children played outside when there wasn't a fence, like in the yard where they were playing. And they noticed that the children played like pretty close to the building, that they'd play with anything that they had. And then they put a fence up the next year, and they found that the children used the whole yard and played within the entirety of this backyard of the school. And I'm wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit into that, Claire, that is it possible that the boundaries that we're setting actually do invite more community and more communion and more freedom to be able to live out the way that we want, to be able to communicate with those that we want?
Yes, 100%. The more that we reflect on and intentionally frame our own agency, I want to be careful here because it's not we're not self-generating our reality, right? Thanks, Descartes. That's not what happened. We're still dealing with the after effects of that, right? But we don't self-generate our reality, but we are co-creators, right? So our agency is a collaborative work with the Lord, right? So the more that we understand who we are, what we need, are able to state it clearly, and are our authentic selves, the more people will be invited towards us because we have a stable sense of self. Does that make sense? Because people with stable senses of self are people who are able to be present for other people because they are not continually overextending themselves and they are not completely closed off to others. Does that make sense? There's a healthy, not even balance, it's like a different way to live, is with a stable sense of self. And the only way to do that is to allow yourself the freedom to have different levels of intimacy in all of these relationships. It's okay. I think sometimes we feel like there is this egalitarian need. We must love everyone the same amount and the same way. No, absolutely not. And also, I think this is really important. There are going to be seasons in life. A lot of my work in working with clients actually deals with friendship, because wounds in friendship are really painful for people. And so a lot of working with clients are these wounds in friendship. And I think a lot of it comes because there are going to be seasons in life when people who are deeply intimate with us, with whom we have, shall we say, healthily open boundaries because they can come really close to us because we trust them. There are going to be seasons in life where there is greater distance there, either because of circumstances or because something's going on with them that maybe makes them not so attuned to healthy boundaries or makes us not so attuned to their boundaries. And like allowing that to happen, allowing there to be a difference in the way we interact with different people and not, again, put this extra rigor on ourselves. We're so rough with ourselves in terms of how we police our emotions and I think sometimes we forget that to have a healthy sense of self is to understand that you have choice in how you interact with people. You have choice.
That's so important. Yeah. So helpful, Claire. I think there are so many tidbits of wisdom that you have shared in this episode and also the last episode. Before we wrap up, is there any thoughts of encouragement or any sort of final thoughts that you would like to share with listeners on boundaries?
I think just that this is hard work. I think sometimes talking with colleagues, talking with friends about the work of counseling, I think people are finally moving away from this sense that an hour of therapy is somehow some sort of internal, like psychological massage, right? That it's like actually work, that it's like sometimes it's really hard, deeply emotional, painful work, or just difficult, very challenging work. And reflecting on, okay, where are my boundaries? Do I have good boundaries? Are there relationships where I don't have great boundaries? How can I extend them so that I feel safer and so I can interact with people more freely? This is work, okay? And it is the work of a lifetime because you're going to be you're in community all the time. I also think that one of the things that can shape healthy boundaries is this. I remember being at the John Paul II Institute, and this was, I think, after sometime in 2005, and there had been a terrorist bombing in Madrid. And I remember we were all very concerned about the family of one of the priests at the Institute because he was from Spain. And we went to Mass, and during the homily, the priest addressed everyone's concerns for him. He said, "Thank you for all of your prayers. My family is safe." And he said this, he said, "When something like this happens, the question is always, what can we do to make sure this never happens again?" And he said, here at the Institute, the John Paul II Institute, he said, and really the work of every Christian is to educate people in the certainty of being loved. That is your work. It is to educate people in the certainty of being loved, because people who were certain they were loved could never make this choice. And I remember that sitting with me. I return to that, I would say, at least once or twice a week. And it's been almost 20 years. That's bananas, since I've been at the Institute. But I have returned to that again and again, that our job as Christians is to educate people on the certainty of being loved. And to do that, we first have to let sink into our hearts again and again the certainty that we are loved. And sometimes, for some people, difficulty setting boundaries comes because we are fearful that we are unlovable. And so we make our boundaries so porous that we hope that somebody, at least, even if they're a steamroller, will come in. But if we root ourselves in the truth that we are loved, our value is incalculable, that there will never be a moment when we are not loved into existence, that frees up space in us to value relationships rightly so that we can give ourselves the freedom to choose healthy people to interact with, to limit unhealthy people or people with unhealthy habits access to us.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for just being you, for answering God's call to do this work, because you have been such a beautiful witness to this community. And I know I'm just really eager for our community to hear this episode. So listeners, if any of this was helpful to you, let us know. We'd love to let Claire know that it's helpful. And yeah, we'd love to connect you with anyone if that's something that you're needing right now. But we're praying for you, especially in this holiday season, as we are needing to set boundaries, and we're doing that internal work, that real work in ourselves and with our spouse. And just know that we're here walking with you along the path wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. We would be so grateful if you took a minute to rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Don't forget to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and community prayer list, read our blog, and register for virtual and in-person events. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.